Good man, and he serves the Lord. So without further ado, let me bring up the Reverend Alpha.
Good morning. Good morning. First, giving honor to God and thanking Him for another day, a day we neither earned nor deserved. Yes. Many of us get up in the morning like God owed us another day. Or like we did something to earn another day. But I don't care how holy you are or pious you appear to be. All of us have done enough wrong that any night we rest, if God just checked the record, none of us would make the next morning. Every day is an expression of His mercy and a gift of His loving kindness. And we ought to do something every day to show Him that we're grateful, that He gave us something He didn't owe us, but gave it to us anyhow. And I'm glad to be here again and having been invited to share a word with you this morning on this occasion that has meant so much to so many of us down through the years. Let's give a big hand to Mr. Earl Green. We did know each other since nursery school, both of us. Obviously, I was the more religious of them. I want to turn your attention this morning briefly to the book of Exodus, the 20th chapter, and a simple verse, the 12th verse. And it reads, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. I thought in flying in late last night about where we are in history. About a year and 2 months ago, I got a call from Earl Graves, who told me that he felt that all of us ought to be doing all we can to support Senator Barack Obama for president. And I began to talk back and forth about the issue, and then he said that Barbara and I just think that it is a very astute observation that one must make and when history is moving, and that the person that is right for that role. So I told him, well, if you didn't tell me Barbara was for, that settles everything. I thought this was some Earl. Now that Barbara's spoken, we got out our Obama side. But then I thought, as I was headed to Denver this week, I thought about how this point in history is very much like other points in history. History has a way of repeating itself. And those that do not study what comes before them will not know what to do at their time. When I arrived, I talked at length with Senator Obama, and he said something that brought me to this morning. He said to me, one of the things I want to do is the morning that I accept the nomination, I want to have a prayer breakfast. And I want to commemorate that it is the 45th anniversary of the March on Washington. Amen. He said that I would want you and Dr. King's children to keynote that occasion, which we did. And one of the reasons that it was important to do that, he said, is that there must be an official recognition of how far we've come and those that paved the way for us to come. Martin III and Bernice and I did the prayer breakfast that morning and several interviews around that morning. The irony is that all three of us were too young at that time to go to the march. I was only 8, Martin was 6, Bernice was not even born. And it was some that said, well, why would they convene it? So clearly we invited some of the leaders that were still around that was there. But as we got into the session and went through explaining why the dream of Dr. King was important and how Barack Obama's nomination was part of that dream, and then to stand that night with over 80,000 people in the stadium and watch a manifestation of history.
Right.
I thought about how 40 years ago Dr. King was killed. I sat next to the Kennedys, Ethel Kennedy, the wife of Robert Kennedy, who also, Robert Kennedy was killed that year. And my mind went back to this scripture because in the biblical days, the story was that God sent Moses to stand up to Pharaoh. And we all know the story how he, being ordered by God, told Pharaoh to let his children go. And how when Pharaoh finally let them go, they went to the banks of the Red Sea, and God performed a miracle of giving them dry land in the middle of the Red Sea. And they walked through the Red Sea into the wilderness. But the real part that I want to emphasize is that they did not go from the passing of the Red Sea immediately to the Promised Land. They wandered. And they wandered for 40 years. Why did they wander? Historians have now charted that it was only a 3 or 4 month journey from where they were to ultimately where the Canaan land was. The reason they wandered is they got lost in the wilderness. And when you get lost, you could be right upon where you are trying to go. You could have your victory, you could have your destiny within reach. But if you're lost, you can't achieve it because you don't know where you are. Signs that they were lost is they immediately began worshiping false gods, building graven images, worshiping golden trinkets, doing the bling bling in the wilderness. Forgetting the values and forgetting the standards and forgetting the dreams that brought them across the Red Sea. It is probably the dark side of human nature that once we get a measure of deliverance, we become wayward and forget the disciplines and sacrifices that brought us. All of us, when we face crisis, make all kinds of promises to God. Make all kinds of vows and commitments. And the minute we get a little measure of success, we forget everything we promised. We start adjusting our vows and start modifying our commitments. And even start rationalizing whether it was God that brought us through. And start telling ourselves that maybe we did it on our own. Or really, that's all superstitious. And all of this happened with the children in the wilderness. And Moses went up because he had to get the orders, the moral code on how we go forward. You can't govern without rules and laws. And that's what God gave him the 10 Commandments. And first he said in the commandments to Moses, you can't serve other gods. You can't build graven images. Why was that first? Well, because if you worship the gods that didn't deliver you, you then shortchange and cancel your own deliverance. If you worship the gods of materialism rather than the God that blesses you, and your material possessions are a result of your life, not the goal of your life, then you will build things rather than you, and your character will not measure even the things you have. So many people end up becoming obsessed with possessions, but their obsession is to try to also cover the lack of character they have. A lot of people bejewel themselves because they really don't feel good about themselves. So we hide behind jewels so you won't look at me. And if you don't build your character, it doesn't matter what you possess, because your bad character will still shine through. It's like putting on perfume without bathing. make the sense worse. But then after that, God said, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, work 6 days, rest the seventh. And then he immediately said, but honor thy father and mother. Why honor thy father and mother? Because, first of all, you must have a sense of where you came from. Right. No matter what you become, no matter who you think you are, it was part of the orders of God that you honor first your inception. And let me dwell on that a minute. No one here chose their mother and father. Right. I don't care how brilliant you are, where you went to school, what level of IQ you have. No one sat somewhere in the great beyond and gave you a multiple choice of who your parents would be. No one gave you a choice of where you would be born and under what circumstances. So all of that happened without any participation or consent by you. Right. In fact, all of that was decided for you. And by the time you became old enough to understand who you were and who your parents were, you had already gone through that course at least 2 or 3 years. That choice helps to frame who you are and gives context to what contribution you'll make in life or not. I was once in the dugout of a basketball team, and a young man was telling me that he had read my story, how I came out of a broken home. He says that my father wasn't any good. I said, well, our fathers sometimes have weaknesses and shortcomings, but don't say they're not any good, because you and I both are also a result of them. Right. He said, no, my coach was what was good to me. I said, yeah, your coach helped to develop you. But the reason you're 6'9" is the genetics of your father. Your father didn't give you those genes. And it's somewhere your father's contribution to you also challenges you not to reduplicate his weaknesses, but to build on his strengths. What do I mean by that? That it is important that as we move in history, that we understand one of the challenges God gave the Israelites is that you must honor those that produced you. And this contemporary arrogance where we rebel against those that produced us shows that we are unworthy to be those that will continue. If you fast forward the story of the Israelites, one of the things that Joshua did when he led them into promised land is he fulfilled the commitment that they would bring the bones of Joseph into the promised land. Joseph in the Bible had said, when they enter into the promised land, bring my bones. And Joshua honored that commitment. Why? Because who was the promised land promised to? It was promised to Joseph, not Joshua. And many of us that are now going into major corporations and major areas that blacks could not go in before, and even within reach of the White House, it is done on the promise God made to those that suffered and sacrificed and prayed and built. It's like a God's humor and irony that many of us think that the sacrifices that were made are something to shun and something to get away from. That's why I was proud when Senator Obama said, no, we must remember this day. Because this dream was not our dream. We're a result of those that saw nothing but despair and dreamed anyhow. Do you remember, you that are old enough or those that are younger that read it, that when they went to Washington August 28, 1963, they had just left Birmingham where churches had been bombed. Right. Women had dogs biting them. Others had been killed in Mississippi, and churches bombed and homes destroyed, and people had to spend nights in jail. But the real beauty of Dr. King's speech that day is when he stood up, he did not curse America out. He did not talk about how America was wrong to shoot Medgar. He didn't even mention Medgar. He took a height above pain and the suffering of the time. And it said, despite all of that, I still have a dream. What is so contemptible to me about some of us that now glory and wallow in what is wrong, don't realize the history of our people is not to duplicate and recycle the pain of life, but to go above the pain and give promise to our young folk above the pain. I remember just last year when Mr. Graves had to discipline a comedian using foul language. And I got into a discussion about a week later with some of the hip-hop artists, and they say, y'all don't understand. I said, we don't understand what? He said, we just keep it real. We give it the way we see it. I said, but that's not the history of our people. The history of our people is that we use our art to lift our people. It's easy to just give what you see. It's a little more difficult to raise people's heights above their circumstance and make them dream beyond their pain. What did we sing and say? We sung Go Down Moses, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. We didn't sing about niggas in the field picking cotton. That's what we saw. What did we sing in segregation? We shall overcome. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. What nobody sing about the hole in the back of the bus? This is some new lost wilderness song where we condemn those that are down with us rather than lift them and give them a dream and give them a spirit and give them an urgency to rise above their circumstances. So no longer do the enemies of God beat us down, we beat ourselves down. And then we come with this Willie Lynch syndrome of condemning the fathers and mothers that made it. Well, they're old school. They don't understand. It's a new day. Well, then what day is it? And then how did it become that day? It became that day because some people paid the price so that day would come. Yes, glory in your youth, glory in the newness of day, but remember that the options you have were options that you did not bring about. It was your mothers and fathers that made it possible. And that is why I believe God gave that commandment, which was my thought today, is He wanted them to understand that until they honored the mothers and fathers that cuddled them and saved them and preserved them even in Egypt, they couldn't make the promised land because they wouldn't know who they were. They didn't know where they were, and they certainly wouldn't know where to go. Yes, Moses, you led the great trek across the Red Sea, but it was your mother that had the mentality and ability to figure out how to hide you from the destruction of Pharaoh. Pharaoh was killing all the newborn males when you were born, and it was an humble Israelite slave woman that figured out if I could just get him down to the back of Pharaoh's house, and maybe Pharaoh's daughter will bring him in, I can raise my son even though I can't call him mine. There wouldn't have been a Red Sea had Moses' mama did what she did. So don't get to the glory of the Red Sea and forget how you got there in the first place. I remember in 1995, we had the great Million Man March. And I remember that morning when the speakers came down on the steps of the Capitol, and I looked out and saw almost 2 million people. It was an awesome sight. And a young man standing near me said, Reverend Al, this is a great day. I said, yes, it is. He says, and we beat them. I looked a little puzzled at him. I said, we beat who? He said, we beat the march in 63. I said, why would you say that? He said, because in 63, they only had 250,000 people here when King talked about his dream. Today we have almost 2 million. I said, oh, well, brother, I said, we do have much more people than they had, but we didn't beat them. He said, well, how can you say that? I said, you must remember when they came to Washington in 63, They came on the back of buses. They had to sleep in their cars because there wasn't a motel that would rent them a room. They had greasy brown paper bags because they had to put their sandwiches, their fried chicken sandwiches in paper bags, because there wasn't restaurants that would sell them a meal. Many of them had to drive for miles holding their bodies because they couldn't use a public toilet. But because they came in '63, we flew back first class in '95. Don't ever forget why you are where you are, because if you forget it, you won't lose it. You're not there by invitation, you're there by struggle and a merciful God that heard the prayers of your mothers and fathers who had earned his hearing, and he blessed their cause. Many of us become so involved in our own ego that we forget that we're the results of those before us. And the children we spring should be able to look at us in the same honor. Yes, we are places today we have never been, but it's because of those that paid the price, that believed against all doubt and fear that we would get here, and hope when we got here that we would not suffer from amnesia. Every corporate executive VP of color, every president of color of a Fortune 500 company is a result of those like Earl Grey. They're not the alternative, they're the results. You can't be an alternative to those that produce you. You at best could be an offspring that vindicated their sacrifice. But when you start acting as if you're the alternative to those that produce you, you become one that loses the respect of your own and despised by others because they realize that you're just somebody lost in a lofty position. Imagine we must go and argue with those that we fought for to find room in their budgets to invest in the movement that brought them about. Imagine people having joy in telling entrepreneurs of their own community, I don't believe in contracts or advertising. When it had not been for those struggles, you wouldn't be where you were. That's right. But the good news is we don't have to suffer you long, because they will send you back to us. Because you did notice that when you got your package, it was a round-trip ticket. But even more narrowly, in our personal lives, we must all remember, every day you get up, you should first thank God for another day, and then remember the journey you took. And remember where you are as opposed to your parents, and the things you can do as opposed to them. Think about your mother and father, and honor the fact that God has given you a lap that they couldn't run. Many of our parents never dreamed of even having a meeting at a resort like this, but they fought for that day, and it shows the distance that God has brought us. Sometimes we are so faced with the daily challenges and setbacks and disappointments that we sometimes don't stop and thank God for what he's already done. I heard an old lady say once in church, if you don't do nothing else, I thank him for what he's already done. It's good to read the Bible. It's good to recite what God did for Job. It's good to know that God delivered Daniel in the lion's den. It's great to know he delivered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But sometimes I like to sit and hit the rewind button in my own mind and think about what God has done for me. I can only read other stories, but I know my own story. And you know your story. I'm not talking about things we talk about. I'm not talking about things we would get up and testify to in public. I'm talking about the most private disasters that we've been through. Challenges you thought you'd never make it through. Obstacles you thought would take you out. Days you thought would never end. Nights you faced the storm. And somehow, some way, wasn't going to make it. And you just prayed because you run out and given up, and somehow at the end of yourself, God picked up the pieces and wrapped it all up again and made a way for you. That's when you know God, when you met him at your moment of despair and realize there is a God that's still big and sits high and looks low, and that if I just honor those ahead of me and remember the God above me, he can make my path and guide my feet and bring me to the land of promise. Honor your mother and father as we go through this weekend. Remember those that never saw these days, but always believed these days would come. They kept praying and they kept believing and they kept searching, saying, God, if you never give it to me, give it to my children. And we are the children that rewarded by God on the prayers of our mothers and fathers. Lastly, don't be ashamed of those that were pushed down because they were not choosing to be in that status. They took that for us. And now what will we do for them? I'll leave you a story. I heard Dorothy Norwood, a gospel singer, tell many years ago. She said there was a lady who had worked most of her life as a domestic worker.
All right.
At night she worked in a factory. And somehow she would save her money. Her dream was that her one daughter would go to college.
Yeah.
Somehow it's always interesting to me how folk back in the day, as we call it, would have little jobs and could save money. And we make so much more and can't save nothing. But this lady saved her little money, and when her daughter came of age, she had saved just enough to send her to college. She told her daughter, you don't have to worry, I've got the money. I've been saving throughout all these years for this day to come. And she gave her daughter the money. Her daughter went off to school 4 years. She didn't have enough for her daughter to come back during spring break. Her daughter got a little part-time job and worked every spring break, and her mother had spent what she could for her books. And after 4 long years, she finally got a letter from her daughter saying, I'll be home this Saturday. Meet me at the bus stop. I think the bus arrives at 11 o'clock. Her mother was so excited. She'd not seen her daughter in 4 years, and her daughter had fulfilled her dream, the first one in their family tree to get a bachelor's degree. The mother got to the bus stop 8 that morning because she couldn't wait till the 11 o'clock hour. Finally, about an hour and a half later, other families started gathering, and everyone was excited and chatty, waiting on the young people to come home from college. Finally, someone yelled, there's the bus coming afar. Soon as the bus started coming closer, everyone excitedly went out to the edge of the road. And as the bus stopped, young people got off the bus and fell into the arms of their parents, and there was embracing and photographs and kissing all over the place. And this mother kept looking for her daughter. Finally, her daughter very slowly and shyly got off the bus, and she ran to embrace her daughter. Her daughter turned away and started walking down the block. Mother put her arms down and walked very slowly behind her daughter, and about 2 blocks down, her daughter finally turned and stopped and hugged her mother and said, I'm glad I'm home. Mother was taken a little aback, but she said nothing. She hugged her back, took her on home. She had prepared for her favorite lunch, because only mama knows what you really like to eat. They sat around the table chatting and talking and eating her favorite food. But finally her mother said, I have to ask you something. I didn't want to really bring it up, but you acted strange at the bus stop. What was wrong? I saw the other kids hugging and kissing and embracing and taking pictures with their parents, and you seemed a little awkward when you saw me. And she said, well, Ma, I never brought it up growing up, but I think I can tell you now. I've always been a little conscious about that ugly scar on your face. It's such an ugly scar. And, you know, I've got new friends now, and we're all into all kinds of things, and we're all a little cultured. And I really didn't want my friends to know the lady with the ugly scar was my mother. Mother Val, she said, "Oh, I understand." She said, "But let me tell you something I never told you." She said, "What's that?" She said, "Well, you know, when we moved out here and I was taking care of cleaning and washing, and I had come outside one morning and I was hanging the clothes out here on the clothesline, and I turned around and the house had caught fire. And all I could think about is my baby's inside." She said, "I dropped the clothes and I ran to the door. A neighbor, unbeknown to me, had already called the fire department and the police, and they had reached the door about the time I did. And the police told me to back up. I told them, no, this is my house and my baby's inside." He said, "I'm sorry, miss, the house is ablaze. You can't go in." She said, "I gotta go in. My baby's inside." They said, "We'll take care of the baby." She said, "Yes, but you don't know where her crib is. You don't know the house." And I broke through the arms of the police. And when I got inside, there was flames and fire everywhere. I covered my face as much as I could and moved to the crib. And as I stood there with flames all around me, I chose to drop my arm and pick you up. I chose your life over my faith. And I ran back through the flames and brought you to safety. Yes, I have an ugly scar on my face. But I didn't get that scar freebasing in some crack house. And I didn't get that scar hanging out all night. I got that scar because I chose to save your life. Some of our mothers and fathers are scarred. Some of them are not impressive to our new friends. Some of them are old school and got old ways. But they got their scars making a way for you and I, opening doors that were shut in our face. They took those scars and made us stars. Honor your mother and father that your babies may be